Hi, this is Rohin. You're listening to the free version of the First Principles podcast. It is only one part of the full episode that we release for our premium subscribers. If you'd like to listen to future episodes the very first day they're released as one complete conversation, then please consider upgrading to our premium version. You can do that either by subscribing to the Ken's premium plan, which unlocks all our premium podcasts via our subscriber apps, or you can just subscribe to the Ken's premium channel on Apple Podcasts for a really affordable monthly subscription price. That will unlock all our premium podcasts. Our premium podcasts include First Principles, of course, but also 2 by 2 The Nut Graph, and Make India Competitive Again. Check the show notes for links to all of these. Now, back to the episode, and thank you for listening. Delhivery, the logistics company, started out in Delhi. It even has Delhi in its name, literally. Yet, a few weeks ago, I flew to Goa to meet its co-founder and CEO, Sahil Barua, because that's where Delhivery's headquarters are now. It was a day trip. I took an early morning flight, spent a few hours at a quaint cafe where I was the only guest, then walked about 15 minutes through very still and hot back alleys filled with cashewnut and mango trees before ending up on a dusty highway dodging traffic next to an under-construction flyover. By the time I got to the studio I was meeting Sahil at, my adventure quota for the day was almost over. I loved it. This was the first time I was meeting Sahil. We'd only exchanged emails with each other. He's tall, lean, and bearded. There's a certain air of seriousness, for want of a better word, to him, a professorial sort. I steeled myself, expecting our conversation to be a bit stiff. But Sahil completely surprised me, because he felt completely at ease, diving into answers, explanations, and reflections without any hesitation. It wasn't impulsiveness, but a certain ease with his own thoughts and actions which did not require polishing or editing before being shared. It was something that kept coming up time and again in my conversation with him. From joining consulting firm Bain right around the time they had set up shop in India, to signing up for a triathlon without much regard for what the challenge holds, to moving Delhivery to, well, Goa. But at Delhivery, as it has become a giant in the e-commerce and logistics business, he tells one thing to his employees.
There are two things we tell everyone without fail. One is do not move fast and break things. Actually, that is something that we actually say in induction. Don't move fast, don't break things. Because at our scale, it doesn't make sense. And the second thing that we tell everybody is that the good thing about operations is also the bad thing about operations in our business, which is you're only as good as you were yesterday. Nothing matters. I can't go to a customer, or if I screwed up your shipping from 2 months ago, or I did a great job 2 months ago and I lose your package tomorrow, I can't come and say, hey, Rohin, so I get a mulligan for, doing a good job 2 months ago. So that's the other thing at least I keep telling people, and we keep reminding them that, every day is a new day. So you forget everything you knew yesterday.
Delhivery might not be a sexy business from the outside, but the systems they have built and continue to build, as Sahil explains, position it as a company that is always innovating and iterating in a sector which has largely remained the same for decades. And as Sahil repeated in different ways, the biggest effort they have taken is building the most effective network out there. Sahil tracks Delhivery's journey, how he and his co-founders built a logistics network in the image of a telecom network, and how he has grown to be a better and calmer founder over the years. I talked to Sahil Barua, co-founder and CEO of Delhivery, about that and a lot more during the course of our conversation. This is Rohin Dharmakumar, your host. Welcome to First Principles. I apologize for the slightly lower quality of the audio. This time we're recording from a different studio. Thank you for understanding. Let's get started. You've been Delhivery's CEO since inception,
That's right.
right? Delhivery has evolved significantly. How have you evolved as CEO? Because often what happens is people tend to see, oh, you've been CEO, you were CEO in 2011, you still are CEO in 2025. So what's changed? How do you reflect on your own evolution as CEO? How is the CEO of 2025, Sahil, different from the CEO of 5 years ago or 10 years ago?
I think when I was starting out, I was more concerned about my own personal ability to a large degree. It was, can I do things myself? And if there was a problem, could I solve it myself? Could I drum up sort of enthusiasm with other people myself and so on? A lot of it was this whole, I must lead from the front kind of idea. What it also meant is that it was easier to be frequently disappointed or angry when things didn't go a certain way back in the day, right? Because the reality is you felt like you were making all of these efforts and sometimes the org wouldn't respond. And so I guess I was more impatient, more sort of likely to demand instant solutions to problems that didn't have instant solutions at the time. I've learned to curb some of my worse impulses over time. Not all, to be honest, but at least some, where I think I'm able to sort of step back a bit more, force myself over, well, now maybe not so much force myself, I had to force myself in between, but really step back often and think about why we want to move in a certain direction. So it's enabled me to make the company operate more slowly than it did, more deliberately than it did. And now I find that it frustrates other people instead of me, where they say we want to move faster and I say, no,
That's
let's
very
move slower.
interesting that from being frustrated yourself because things weren't moving fast enough.
Yeah.
Now others get frustrated because you're insisting that things move
Move a little more
slower.
slowly.
What? No, but makes perfect sense. I want to understand what or when or how this transition came about. What?
It came about through an interesting, it came about because of, again, a pointed conversation. Our PTL business was going nowhere when we started it.
That's a part truckload.
Business when we started it out. The idea was absolutely crystal clear. The math was clear, but somehow the business just wouldn't work. It wouldn't do what we wanted it to do. We would get volumes and we would screw it up. We wouldn't deliver on time. We had technical challenges. We had operational challenges. And I remember I used to get super frustrated at the time and I'd lose my temper reasonably often, saying this is such a basic mistake and, how can we make this? And one of the guys who used to work with us, this guy called Don who used to work with me at the time, one day he came over and he's like, look, we're all trying really hard and we all want this to succeed. But you need to let us help you, number one. We're doing our best. And the second thing is, why don't we all just step back a little bit and why don't you think about how you want to build the business, not where do you want us to get to? And let's spend some time doing that. And
what was your first thought when he said this? Absolutely everything that he's saying is, brilliant and perfect. It's the absolute kind of jolt you must have needed. Now with the benefit of hindsight. But in that moment, what did you think?
I'll be honest, my instant reaction actually is I went cold. I still remember that. I actually went absolutely cold because it made sense. And, I'd worked with Don quite a while by then. And so I knew Don, I trusted Don. I knew he wasn't coming from a place where it was badly sort of meant. It still wasn't pleasant. And my first instinct was to immediately say, but Don, we're still not doing the numbers we said we would do. And what the hell? But it struck me and then it stayed with me for a while and made me super uncomfortable. But I didn't like it.
It's very hard for founders to listen to someone, tell them something and not offer the last word back in return and say, this is what we should do.
Super uncomfortable, man, because you suddenly look at it and you say, man, if this is how Don thinks I'm doing, maybe I'm not doing as well as I think, I am doing at the time. And that was true. I wasn't. And that's how it began. That's the first time it struck me saying I need to step back a lot more. And I really need to get out of teams' ways. My job is to get out of people's way, not to actually try to,
be the
move
hub
them forward. Yeah. Decentralized. Don't be the hub. I guess there's a pattern here. But that was a moment, yeah. And then that helped. Actually, after that went off, I went to Vipassana for 10 days.
I was just about to ask you, because from that kind of a moment, usually if you go into a reflective state, it would lead to meditation, Vipassana. So I was just about to say thank you. Huh.
So
How was it? You do for a proper full Vipassana?
Yeah, it's the full thing. As with all things, I just said the 10-day one. Let's see how hard it can be. I showed up in Gorai in Bombay. It was helpful. For 10 days, you realize the world doesn't collapse when you're not there, which is a relief because you suddenly realize you're not that important. It's helpful. Up till that moment, it was like, okay, if I'm not here, will everything work? And suddenly you're like, well, actually, everything works just fine when you're not here. And
it must have been very gratifying as well to, at that point, realize that you're not as important as you thought you were. But I think more importantly, you realize that your team is much more and your organization is much more resilient than you probably thought they are. And that must make you feel proud at some level, right? So
those parts do. But it does come with fear as well, man. The fear also is, am I no longer good enough to continue in the role that I'm in? And that's a fear that all of us as founders, we talk about very often, saying, are we still the right guys to do what we're doing? Do we still understand this well enough? And the good thing so far, at least, is it forces us to up our game. To say we need to study a little harder, we need to read a bit more, we need to go out a little bit more and spend more time on the ground. As long as that continues and we can stay ahead of the game, it's okay. One day, the reality is that, we're not going to be. Interesting
that you should say that because, especially with founders and especially in your context, if you say, and I'm taking it absolutely at your at face value, when you say that, look, delivery businesses have existed for the longest time, but we are essentially trying to undo or probably redo or think things different. So we cannot look up to what they do in order to draw inspiration. And therefore, as a founder, you don't have any benchmarks or references to. So this point, to bring it back to the point you were discussing, when every, 3, 4, 5 years, you feel the need to re-up your game, what do you anchor? What's an external anchor? Because sometimes it helps to have an external anchor and say, I want to model myself on something that this person has done or this company has done. When those external anchors are missing, what do you do? What's your anchor?
We huddle internally. We have a solid board which asks us interesting questions. The latest one, as an example, is they're saying, it's a very fundamental thing, and I was irritated when I heard it the first time. Does your model still make sense? And my gut reaction is, of course it does. And then I said, but I have to prove it again. And actually, we haven't done that for a while. So we need to rewrite all the math and see that it still works.
Was the context quick commerce or
something?
The
context was not just quick commerce. Saying cities have changed since you started up. Distribution of goods has changed. You have more freight than you anticipated. And it's a good question. It does force us to go back.
And the nature of customers has changed because now Amazon and Flipkart and then, of course, Meesho with its own Valmo. So it's changed.
It's changed. So saying, are your assumptions still true? And we have to go back. But otherwise, a lot of it is we huddle internally. Over a period of time, we have a large number of people who stayed with the company a while. And what we try and do is to collect as often as we can and really say,
in what forms or formats?
We just get together. We have, we're going to do it again tomorrow. A lot of
this
it is
not the annual offsite kind of thing because you seem to be saying it happens much more frequently.
Yes. So the senior team gets together much more often to sort of debate this out. And very often it could be as simple as Kapil saying, look, how exactly do you think, should we change the network model for how we're delivering in same city? And it'll start with an innocuous looking question. And then it starts off saying, okay, what does that mean? Where, which parts are you worried about? He's like, I've been looking at some of the data. Looks like we're taking a lot of time delivering these kinds of orders. And you dig in, you say, all right, fine. What did we get wrong? How do we redo this whole thing from scratch? Or there's an external event. Quick commerce is a good example, right? We've been racking our brains saying, where do we fit in this whole thing? And what do we think the end state of quick commerce will look like independently? What kind of network models make sense? But a lot of our sort of locus of feedback is internal. And part of it is also because we do believe quite firmly that if you don't have a very powerful internal engine, which is studying as hard as it can, and you're dependent on other people to tell you what's going on, then the problem is you've essentially outsourced the core of your business. The core of our business is not execution. It's design. And so you can't end up outsourcing that. We have to think harder. We have to expose ourselves to what's happening around the world.
That's very interesting. So these meetings which happen frequently, what is it? Someone just calls it and says, we're going to spend 3-4 hours or half a day or a full day discussing something?
Oftentimes, there's sometimes no agenda. It's just we're going to get together in this place and we're going to just sit. We don't have a concrete agenda. It may start somewhere. So usually there'll be one or two things that we know that we want to talk about. Quick commerce has been a good
So
example.
proximity helps because having everyone in one place.
It's important because at that point, we're not thinking about anything else. We're usually sequestered in either occasionally one of our offices, or on a very rare occasion, we'll head out somewhere completely different and try to have this conversation. It also, day to day, you can't be in a day-to-day environment when you're doing that. Otherwise, somebody will come and say, "Hey, what do you think about this decision? What do you think about that?" So we have to go out and do it. It happens usually, we used to do it we tried to do it once a month. Then we realized once a month was too frequent. So now we're somewhere between sort of once or twice a quarter. We'll get together.
Also, I think once you make it like a regular, frequent event, then I think sometimes, I don't know if it's true in your experience, when it's an expectation that something must be done every month, then I think at some point those meetings lose meaning because you're just trying to fill an agenda.
Yeah, because
as
performative.
opposed, absolutely, right? So if it doesn't happen for 2 months, it's fine. Or sometimes in 1 month, 2 meetings will happen. That's also fine.
We've had months like that. When we went public, for example, we had to do it a lot more often because the sudden shock to the system of going public meant we had to talk a lot more, saying, look, what do we tell investors? How do we deal with this whole new world?
What's the biggest change, or what are the biggest changes that you felt in yourself and in the organization post going public?
I've said this publicly, man. I think running a public company is easier than running a private company. I find it easier because the good thing is we have such a sort of long-term story and clear story that's all I have to do. We go to investors and we say, this is what we do. This is what our numbers say. This is what we're building towards. And if investors like it, they buy the stock. Investors who don't like it, sell the stock. Sometimes they do either of those things for reasons beyond our control. So it's easy. You kind of can say, this is my story.
When you say it's easy, it's obviously relative to something else, relative to being private. How does this play out when you're private?
You have, you have a vast collection of investors. They all have their own agendas. They have their own exit timelines. They have their own theses around why they invested in you. They obviously come with
the multiplicity of narratives and messages and needs, etc.
And when you're private, I think this is purely a personal sort of point of view. I think you have no incentive to develop institutional systems as a private company because you can afford to sort of say, since I'm dealing with such a widely disparate set of people, each sort of conversation is kind of unique and separate, and I don't have to do anything internally to build these systems. But when you're public, your systems have to back your story. And that, I think, is the biggest change organizationally. We've gone from having relatively sort of no systems, kind of Wild West in terms of how we were setting strategy, Wild West in terms of sort of how we were thinking about capital allocation, to now having a fairly structured and clear long-term process that seems to, sort of broadly seems to work.
Help me understand that bit. And I think this is also part of the evolution of many startups, which is as you're growing, to use your example, the Wild West of strategy execution, where someone will come up with something new, like in, let's say, an isolated element of strategy, which absolutely makes sense in that moment, and then you chase it. And then somebody else comes up with something. And then this continues to play out over time, where some get dropped, some succeed, etc. But they're not coherent or all connected to the whole in that sense. In 6 months or 12 months or 2 years, you wonder, hey, remember we had discussed and we launched this thing, whatever happened to it? To now, what you seem to be also saying is that the kind of antithesis to this Wild West is that everything that you say or do must necessarily be anchored back to the core message or the company itself. You cannot have orphaned strategies or this thing, right? So how has that happened at
exactly
Delhivery?
The same way you just pointed it out. When we were much smaller, we did have a lot of these sort of bridges to nowhere. You would start these initiatives and then they would kind of fizzle out and you'd kind of be like, oh, okay. And then suddenly 2 years later, it'd be like, oh, wow, yeah, we actually were doing that 2 years back. Today, a lot of the discussion is around, let's put it this way, we have a set of cores, we effectively call them. One of them is our transportation core, one of them is our warehousing core. And the idea is, how does everything that we intend to do affect either one of the cores directly or one of the participants in the core? And fortunately, we only have 3 participants in our network at an abstracted level. There are vehicles, there are people, and then there's real estate. So it's kind of easy to link back a lot of these. And then, of course, the anchor at the heart of all of it is a set of customers who we've decided we want to serve. So the customer comes absolutely at the top, saying, why does this matter to any of our customers? Why do I want to do this? Right? Then why are we necessarily the right people to do it if I look at our 3 resources? How does this, affect the 3 resources we have? And if the answer to the customer side question is a yes, the answer to the resource side question is a yes, then you get to the gating point which says, okay, now we will invest and go ahead and do this. The good thing is when we invest, we don't back out now.
Because it's being guided by a framework and a model. So you've kind of ensured that it passed through those requisite filters first.
That's right. So that's why quick commerce is an example. It took us a lot of time to get our heads together saying, what does this mean?
Have you still, for example, let me just zoom out and disconnect you from making any projections related to quick commerce and just ask you as a supply chain entrepreneur and a delivery entrepreneur who's done this, what's your long view of quick commerce?
I think, wow. So I think the customer need has been created. And
no, let me challenge that, right? Obviously anyone would want something in 5 minutes, but are you truly fairly pricing it today? Because, if you give me something for free, I'll say, sure, I'll take it.
I agree with you. So I don't think the quick commerce of 2 years from now, and this is not going to be a decadal event. I don't think the quick commerce of 2 years from now is going to look like the quick commerce of today at all. Unfortunately, or the way Indian topographies, again, just fundamentally are, 2 things are going to happen. One is, I think you're going to see a shrinkage in the overall SKUs that become available because it does not make sense to do 50, 60, 70, 80,000 SKUs available to you in 10 minutes, and make money. That's too hard. And Indian real estate doesn't support. So that's as an example of a place where it went to die for us. It didn't get past the second filter. The consumer need is real, our point was, but from a real estate standpoint, this is never going to make sense. You won't be able to make enough money. So I think it'll shrink. I think there'll be a much narrower version of quick commerce that we're likely to see where maybe, 1,000 SKUs being delivered in 10, 15 minutes. I also think a strange thing that's going to happen is we're going to kind of go backwards. India has this weird feature, right? This is a slightly long answer, so bear with me for a second. When you look at Uber and Ola, what's interesting is they came in in the beginning, it was I could get a Mercedes to come and pick me up in 10 minutes.
Oh, I literally discussed this yesterday. We were recording the 2x2 podcast and we were doing one on Blue Smart's implosion. And I'm one of that generation cohort where, when Uber started, I actually took a ride in a BMW's
you got an A8 or something,
and the Merc S-Class, etc. in Delhi for some $300, $400 in the earliest days. And people don't believe it today, saying, what? Sorry, but your point was about Uber when they came in. This is what happened.
Go from there and then you sort of peddle the idea that this instant availability of an army of underutilized cars will somehow be put to service for you without realizing that aggregate system utilization is not improving. And look at where we are today.
And thus, they're still largely loss-making, right? Scale hasn't solved for profits.
Absolutely. And the reality is when you come back to the basics, you suddenly realize, I read these headlines and it's a little funny sometimes. It's Uber decides to launch, you can pre-book your car, for 6 hours later. But that's what Meru was doing in 2008. So sometimes what happens is tech goes a full circle. I'm sure you've heard of the meme.
There are these memes of tech bros rediscover the bus, the train, etc.
And it's not surprising. It is the most efficient form of urban redistribution of people. And I think on quick commerce, what's going to happen is we're going to reinvent modern retail. We're going to reinvent 7-Eleven. Eventually, you're going to see, because what occupies 400 square feet has a basic set of goods that you need to buy and is next to your house. It's a Kirana store. it's, sure, you can say the kirana store is dirty and dingy and it doesn't have inventory management and whatever, the cold chain doesn't work.
Kirana store will become dark and then it will become lit again, but
yes,
now with a better
things
storefront.
In India and things in tech seem to go full circle a little bit, right? We had this thing where, and why not? And the other extreme that's going to happen is you're going to see supermarkets getting reinvented. Because the idea of a big pod, which is 20,000 square feet and has 50,000 SKUs, is a supermarket. And just plain geographical density demands that you will essentially have to build a walk-in market. You'll have to allow consumers to come in. So I think quick commerce will go through that. And so you're essentially going to rebuild modern retail with guys on bikes. And some subset of consumers is then going to transact. But everything else is going to be complex. And on e-commerce, narrowly, there'll be a narrow market. Third party may or may not be. We are one of the third parties. We provide the service. For brands which are able to produce enough demand to deliver sort of same day, which is not a lot of brands, and which can bear the inventory carrying cost of, multiple such dark stores, it might make sense. It'll be a narrow service that people like us will do. But the cost will turn out to be prohibitive as you start scaling it. So it will remain niche is our view.
All right. I'm going to go back to, you as CEO. What's your span of control? How many people do you have who report directly to you?
Probably something like 12-ish.
Are you a believer in frequent recurring one-on-ones, calendared one-on-ones?
I do calendar discussions with people, but they're very rarely sort of these formal review or discussions. Because generally my view with most people is if you need us to be having a formal review conversation, we're in hot water, something's off. So actually I can't think of too many that I've ever had to do. Approaches, they report to me, but logically they only reach out when there's a specific need or some specific input that's required, which is what allows me to have the large span. So no, not a lot of formal.
What's been your philosophy around mentoring and coaching? What works, what doesn't?
Not consciously making it a process, I think, is the most important thing that at least I've realized. There are two ways I look at it. One is as a person who wants people to mentor me. I have a small set of people who I bounce ideas off. A couple of my board members, as an example. And usually it's helpful when I have formed my thinking up to a certain point and then I'm kind of at a decision point and I want to ask, which one do you think is better or worse? It helps clarify. But as somebody, when I have to deal with people who expect me to mentor them in some shape or form, I think it's best when it's completely unstructured. I've had people try the other way, saying, I'll catch up with you once every month and I want you to help me solve this problem. I think my best advice has usually been read this, think about this, go back to the drawing board.
It's interesting that you should have this dichotomy that when you are being mentored, you want that interface to be where you've done the hard work and you arrived at a decision point and you present those decision points to your mentor and say, and I'm guessing your mentor will ask you which one are you already leaning towards, and you'll say X, and you're hoping they'll possibly point out gaps in what you probably haven't thought of, or option Y, etc. In some senses, you aren't giving them two options and saying which one you should I pick. You're saying, I've done my homework, I'm probably leaning towards B, does it validate, etc. But when people come to you, why doesn't this approach work? Why do you want them to be slightly more at an unstructured level?
For the simple reason that, unfortunately, even whether it's within the company or I've seen this in rare occasions that some other founder reaches out, the problem is that I have to be very careful about what I say. Because if I say something which is, highly specific, they generally tend to assume that I'm right. And that's not the case. That need not be the case. So the weight is, unfortunately, it's very different. Within the company, especially if somebody comes and says, I want to think about this a certain way. If I guide towards a path, the problem is it shuts off everything else. That becomes the path. Over a long period of time with board members and so on, I've realized that I don't necessarily worry even when they push back or when they actually specify something else that if I go with two options, they say the second one, well, I want the first. That has gotten built over a long period of time. And the ability to think also and sort of abstract it out it's sort of inherent. But with people in a reporting relationship, if it's a founder who's an earlier stage founder, it becomes very hard because they assume you know better always. So I try to be very careful. It's too scary.
What's the line between someone, and I don't necessarily mean your direct reports, anyone in your organization, another founder, coming to you for an unstructured discussion, unprepared, and coming to you for an unstructured discussion, having done prep? Because usually prep leads to, that first situation that you mentioned. I've done the prep. The logical point forward from the prep is there are some decision points. I've also come to them. So, but the counter to that, unprepared sometimes means literally unprepared, right? Like, how should I think about this?
Yeah. I'll give you 2 examples of actually this and how it works. One of our product managers actually came up and we were trying to look at our last mile. And we were looking at our app and we were looking at everything. And, it was unstructured in the beginning and unprepared. So let's have an unprepared discussion. So he came and said, how should I be thinking about this? Because I can benchmark all of the other apps across the country, what various people are doing, and I can do that. I can look at our existing app and do it. And it was unprepared, and we just agreed on one thing. I said, look, why don't you go back and tell me what you think you want as an outcome for the last mile rider? Forget about the app for a second. Go back and come back. And she spent a lot of time actually. I was worried at some point that she'd forgotten. And she came back and she said, I want riders to earn more money. I feel like, we don't pay them enough. And
that's a good forcing function.
That's a great forcing function, and that has nothing to do with the app. So I can simply increase the rates that we pay to everybody right now and do nothing to the app. Does that solve your problem? That solves my problem. It's great. That's it. So that was an example where the complete lack of sort of preparation was very helpful because there was no preconceived, I've gone through all of this, I have studied it, and now I believe that, we should do X in the app. I think where it could be dangerous. She could have come, for example, and said, I have come up with a new dynamic pricing algorithm which is going to tell us how much we should pay the rider in location X in city Y.
And we could have trying to understand, but what are you trying to achieve?
Yes, and we could have had a great discussion on that. Purely theoretical, but it wouldn't have worked. So that's an example where lack of preparation is sort of helpful.
So don't come with choices. Instead, come with expected outcomes or some sort of direction.
What is the problem? Got it. What is the problem you want to solve is usually the best. But it doesn't always work. There are places where you need to be prepared as well.
What was the other example that
engineering is a good example, right? I can't have, head of engineering, if he were to show up, unfortunately he never does, saying, I want to build a 40,000 square meter facility in Bombay and let's blue sky this. That's not going to work.
And put up NVIDIA chips.
That needs to be properly thought through. You've done the prep. What have you thought through? We've been trying to move to LNG. LNG is not one of those, we're going to do it for shits and giggles kind of thing. If you want,
you mean LNG vehicles?
Vehicles.
Got it.
So it has to be properly thought through. There's a lot of prep that then went in, saying, how will we think about the fuel? Where will it come from? How will we retool all of our systems? And there, obviously, our head of network and head of engineering are very well prepared with a set of choices. And then, obviously, we didn't reach a decision, but the point is those choices were useful. So preparation matters in these kinds of environments. But yeah, it's all work in progress, man.
Do you use a coach?
No, not formally.
All right. What kind of phrases are you known for inside? Do you have any pet phrases that people hear from you in meetings? Maybe I'll make it like sharper, saying that if something really wowed you or if something really grated you, what kind of feedback might people hear from you in a meeting, say in a review meeting?
I think if things are, unfortunately, I think they hear from me more when I'm unhappy than when I'm happy, which is not good on reflection. But I think...
So no news is good news with you, right? Right?
Generally. When things are not going well, one of two things is most common. The most common answer is again. Go back and do it again. And that's the most common feedback, I would guess. I'm sure I say it differently, and I'm sure there's a different way that people are making fun of this in reality. There's probably a meme somewhere, but again is usually the most common feedback when things are not going well. The other most common piece of feedback that I suspect people get when things have not gone well is go to the ground and see what's happening. That is most common, which is see for yourself.
So both versions of these are essentially go back to some source of some kind. Source being go back to the problem, go back to this, ground and meet customers and figure out.
When things are going well, is usually no news. But the most common phrase, I think, is the one that we tell everyone at Delhivery. There are two things we tell everyone without fail. One is do not move fast and break things. Actually, that is something that we actually say in induction. Don't move fast, don't break things. Because at our scale, it doesn't make sense. And the second thing that we tell everybody is that the good thing about operations is also the bad thing about operations in our business, which is you're only as good as you were yesterday. Nothing matters. I can't go to a customer, or if I screwed up your shipping from 2 months ago, or I did a great job 2 months ago and I lose your package tomorrow, I can't come and say, hey, Rohin, I get a mulligan for, doing a good job 2 months ago. So that's the other thing at least I keep telling people, and we keep reminding them that, every day is a new day. So you forget everything you knew yesterday. You wake up in the morning and you start, it's like 50 first dates in business form.
Do you have any other favorite mental models? We talked about first principles, of course.
So my favorite one is always essentially first for anything new that we're building is first to see how it existing, let's say new businesses, is first to say how does delivery make use of this, become the first large internal customer. And if delivery as a large internal customer is not a feasible customer, then we don't proceed. We did part truckload because we realized the middle mile of our express network was a large part truckload outfit. We did full truckload because we realized that's effectively what we were doing in our mid mile. We did warehousing because we realized our transportation network centers were essentially transit warehouses. And so we built everything as first as a customer.
So in some senses, some version of dog fooding, right? Like, you do consume the insight or the gap comes from your own operations, and you try to consume or solve for that using your own operations first.
That's the most common mental model that we will use as a company, which is how does this get used before you put it into external road testing? How do internal customers use it?
Are there some things that have failed through this filter where internally it didn't work and therefore you never decided to
No, that's the good thing. If you do it in a disciplined fashion, we've never retreated from a business that we started.
Because you iteratively move on it till you get internal product market fit.
It's never happened. And that's why, we'll keep doing it. We learned this from Amazon, to be very clear. It's nothing to do with delivery, didn't sort of come up with it ourselves. We watched Amazon do this, year after year after year. And we loved the idea that you can practically see everything that Amazon's going to do years in advance of them doing it. And that strategy is clear as day, but you can't do anything about it. It's absolutely sort of, it's an inexorable march towards whatever their end goal is. AWS was a good example. Logistics is a good example. They telegraph it to you. And we like to do the same thing. All our competitors know exactly what we're going to do. And the good thing is, therefore, there's no variance internally. There's no variance with what we're telling anyone.
What gives you the confidence that even though your competitors can say exactly what you're going to do, they won't be able to beat you to it or replicate it? What's your secret sauce?
Two things. One is, over a period of time, obviously the sheer technical advantages are massive. They're very difficult to recreate. Given a large amount of capital and a large amount of time, all advantages are replicable. There's no question. But that's one. So creating this from scratch, the capital wall is massive. The technical wall is massive. You'd have to hire our entire team out for it to work. But the second problem in network businesses specifically is, it's quote from an entirely different context, but structure is destiny. How you start out, unfortunately, binds you to all subsequent decisions. So for any of our competitors to retool as delivery, you cannot retool on the fly. You have to break down everything you have.
The example that we used of Blue Dart from the beginning, saying that why things are so different and inefficient even today.
Correct. You can't MacGyver your way to sort of building this. You have to have, and
what's an antidote? Sorry, please complete your
point.
What's
an antidote?
No. The structure is destiny. I'll come to that, but you were making a point. I interrupted you.
So saying the problem then becomes, even if you see the path, the issue is that the mastering of the organizational will to do it is very hard. At delivery, the advantage over a period of time is we've never let things settle. And so in that sense, our structure itself is amorphous to begin with. And so we can keep sort of
That was
reinventing
my
on the fly.
question. That how do you avoid falling into the same trap yourself? To wit, your board members' question saying that is your structure still valid? Because even though you may have come up with a new structure, at some point, delivery is no longer. I don't think I mean, I'm sure you see yourself as a challenger, but in many ways, you are an incumbent now.
We're an incumbent.
Right? You're an incumbent,
Yes.
right? So how do you avoid when, like, let's say there was a new delivery, there's a bunch of new founders getting together in, I don't know, Bangalore or Gurgaon and saying that, you know what, delivery structure is wrong. This is the structure of the future. Does that keep you up?
Yes, of course it does. And the reality is there are people over the years who've said that some of our theses are wrong. They said your intra-city network doesn't look right. We can do a better model. And it forces us to go back and study really, 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 really hard, saying what has changed that we don't understand. And we're obviously worried about it. The antidote is you work harder, you study harder, you think about whether your perceptions are correct any longer. We've had startups which have come and said, we can do 20-minute shipping and we'll do it better than delivery. And we realize that there are pockets that they're right. They can do it faster than us, but it doesn't scale. And therefore, we allow those to continue. We say we will not participate because we don't have to be everywhere. But
how hard is that for you to say no to things and trends which might look very interesting or potentially disruptive? For example, I mean, let's take quick commerce, right? I'm sure it couldn't have been easy because so many people must have been asking you, what are you going to do about it? India is going to get run over by quick commerce. Every sector is going to get quick commerceized, right? So in those moments, to not do something, and I'm sure internally there must be lots of employees also who feel, what's our strategy? This is going to get away, right?
Yeah.
So not doing things or taking your own time to do things or being slow at things is hard when, like, the trends are really, like, you look like every instinct that you have tells you that this cannot make money, but every news piece that you read every morning says that, what if my instincts are wrong? How do you kind of counterbalance that? How do you help the organization also calm down a little and instill that culture of, we will do things right and slow and do not stress, do not make decisions under duress?
Now, over a long period of time, our management's been together a very long time. So it's perhaps we're lucky with this, but we're a little less trigger happy with these things. So we go back again and again and again and again, and I keep going back to this. We go back to, how does this make money over time?
Being public helped, because you did say that now you don't have to kind of...
We can't keep jerking things around. We can't keep doing these, experiments to nowhere. So it helps. And a lot of the discipline the teams have themselves. They don't need, me or Kapil or Suraj or, Ajit or somebody to do it for them. They will come back in a disciplined fashion saying, we've studied this hard, we've looked at it, we understand it, and we don't think we have a solution. So that's come, it's again, I'll borrow a running adage, right? To run faster, you have to run slower, but for longer periods of time. That's the only way you build pace, because you build a massive aerobic sort of engine. And running a company is no different. We go slowly.
Help decode that for non-runners.
When you run very slowly over a large period of time, your body becomes extremely efficient at essentially delivering oxygen to your muscles. You're training the body to endure over long periods of time. So you're building essentially an aerobic base for the body. You're essentially, when you're running faster, your ability to distribute oxygen to your muscles is improving. You can't do it if you just train speed. If you just train speed, the problem is you're tiring yourself out. Your body runs out of energy in typically, I think they say about 30 minutes or so. It's the same with a company, right? You have to, when you've built many $100 million businesses over a period of time, building the next one becomes that much it becomes a matter of discipline, practice. Our biggest worry is not whether or not we can build a business. Our biggest worry is, have we built it by accident? Have we built it purely by effort and motivation as opposed to sort of planning and design? And to do that, you have to plan and design a lot more, which is the aerobic system of the company, which is going back, writing your papers, looking at the economics, writing the product notes, explaining why this will make sense in 5 years, 7 years, 10 years. And when you do that repeatedly, again and again and again and again, becoming no becomes saying no becomes very easy. You can just do it. 99% of our ideas don't see light of day because they're just not, large enough. They're just not well thought out enough. They don't have a future. And so we don't do them.
All right. Since you've mentioned running so many times, what sort of shoes do you run in?
Old Nikes.
Have you ever tried barefoot? Have you been a convert to?
I've never tried. I have the Vivo barefoot.
Yeah,
shoe.
Vivo barefoot, Vibrams, Luna sandals,
Never
pure
tried.
barefoot.
I keep hearing I should.
Yeah, I mean, I say this as a convert because
you've tried it?
I'm a fully. I mean, I only wear all sorts of barefoot shoes and sandals to office. I've even run in Luna sandals and the Vibram, 5 fingers, etc. So I was just curious because there's one of those connecting back to books that sometimes change you. So I think it was Born to Run. This book, I think Billy McDougall, right?
Interesting.
Fascinating book,
sure.
right? Where he went to, I don't know if you've heard of it or not.
I have.
Yeah. So it just changed me. But kind of coming back to how do you learn? I talked about books, we talked about running. How do you learn?
Read a hell of a lot.
Books?
Yes.
What sort
Everything
of books?
I can, but a lot of books in general. By what sort? I'll read more or less anything, typically anywhere between 3 and 5 books at a time. I try to make sure, so it depends on travel. I usually try to make sure I'm reading between about 150 to 200 books a year. If I can, I have specific sources that I like reading outside of that on the internet. So while I don't have social media, I try and read as much long form as I can. All my learning is A, reading, and B, outside of that, then just isolating myself and thinking as much as I can about what I read.
And when you read so many books, okay, this is a personal curiosity. Are you one of those types who annotates, take notes, creates some kind of a retrieval database so that you can go back to it? Or are you on the other spectrum where I'm reading it, it's passing through my brain and filters, some of it will get stuck around, some of them I'll remember? Or are you somewhere in the middle of this spectrum?
Somewhere in the middle. I do annotate.
What's your method?
I do annotate. But it really depends.
In the physical book, in Kindle?
Sometimes I don't have a Kindle, so I can't.
So it's in a physical book.
Yeah, I just have never been able to consume.
All right, let's say you annotate. What happens after that? You read 50, 500 books a day. You annotate. Those books how do you remember what to go back to?
It'll come up at random times. I'll give you an example. I was reading the poetry of T.S. Eliot for some reason, and there were so many references. And the first one was Proofrock, and I was going back, and I just realized there were so many references that I didn't fully understand. So you go back and forth, and then you keep annotating over there. And one day, in a completely unrelated environment, something struck me, and I said, I have to go back and reread. Let me go and check. And I just opened it up, and in that case, I said, look, I want to read this part of Proofrock again. There are many books where I go back to specific sections because they kind of stick. Usually because I've annotated something that particularly stuck out.
Pen or highlighter?
I use I use either a pen or a pencil. I have a favorite pencil that sort of is there, but pen as well. And
what are you reading these days?
A combination of different things. I'm reading a book on 5,000 histories of the history of debt over 5,000 years, David Graeber. I read an interesting book on transportation design for cities in the US, which is sort of a history of the auto age and how cities came to be in the US. Then out of nowhere, I suspect this is because I was experimenting with watching a K-drama. I heard of a Korean author called Han Kang. And so I picked this up. I picked up a book.
Was it fiction?
Fiction again. Interesting. I didn't know the history of Jeju Island. So that was a bit shocking.
It's a bit
also
dark, if I vaguely remember,
it is,
right?
Extremely.
Yeah.
So I didn't realize at all. So that was particularly interesting. And I'm trying to read a book right now on various styles of architecture, specifically in India. That's another thing I like
very
doing.
Interesting. It's a very varied, transportation design, Korean fiction,
There's no
architecture.
There's no method to it. like I said, I grew up reading, right? I grew up in an academic world, so my bookshelves were all
where
around.
I guess it, yeah, because you must have seen all these kind of
So you just pick up
books,
stuff
right.
on the way and start reading and work your way through it. I used to read one at a time. That's the only difference now. I used to read one book at a time, wait till I finish, and then get to the next one. Now I kind of am doing 3 or 4 or 5 books at a time.
When did that switch happen? And how? Do you remember? Because, I mean, at least I remember for the longest time, it was like you have this thing of, I started it, I got to finish it, I need to get closure before I move on to the next one. And if you can't get closure, you feel like, I'm a failure. How can I just let this go? And it hangs over me. And at some point, you're like, it's okay. If I don't finish it, maybe I won't, and I'm fine with that. If I'm reading 3 at the same time, I'll let myself gravitate to whatever I want to read, and it's okay, right? Like, it happened maybe like 2 years ago for me.
I'm not fully there. I still feel guilty. It started in COVID because I realized suddenly that there was so much I wanted to read that was just sitting around, books I'd bought over time, that if I tried to read them one at a time, I would never be able to get to the end of it. So I said, I have to speed read a different way.
No, but come on, you're like designing networks and throughput. You know that this is not a parallel processing problem. You're not inventing more of yourself.
But I just felt like I need to absorb as much as I can, as fast as I can. And the first time I didn't read a book fully through, it gave me sleepless nights, man. The book was there and I would keep looking at it and I used to keep feeling like the book's looking at me as well.
Right. You failed.
Yeah, finished the last 200 pages. I was reading The Age of Surveillance Capitalism.
Shoshana or something, right? Dubov.
I went like 70% of the way.
I have that book. I haven't read it. It's like one of those books. I bought it because I must have it. And then I haven't read it.
It's this capital in the 21st century. You get through about half of it and you're like, oh my God, why did I even start? But no, I realized that 70% of the way it was starting to sound repetitive. A lot of what the basic point was clear. And so I gave up. And then the book guilted me
It's a
for a
common
long time.
criticism of American authors especially, that they have an idea and they stretch it out into like too many pages and books. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. The new Russians.
Right. What's personal time for you?
A lot of the time is personal time. I work only maybe about 8 hours a day or less. What I do with it is there's training. A reasonable portion is training, running, riding, swimming, walking, strength, etc. That's probably 14 hours a week. A lot of it is reading. A lot of it is cooking. I cook a lot. So I started cooking 20 years ago. So cook all my meals. That's just a good way to unwind. And I still play.
But you're also single.
Yeah, I still play. I still do a bunch of other stuff. I used to play music once upon a time. I can't find time for it any longer, unfortunately.
How have you made peace or balance with the conflicting nature of work and personal life? At some point, I'm sure you must have seen them both at opposition with each other. Yeah. That every hour that I'm not spending working on a problem related to delivery is an hour wasted, right? And at some point, obviously you seem to lead a fairly balanced life. That must have come undone. Yes. And you're right. When and how did that happen?
That was part of the reason to sort of get back into fitness in some shape or form. I realized that I just wasn't being effective. I was tired. What I realized is that to be most effective, I need to sort of be in a physical and mental state that allows me to be productive, which is also part of the reason why why the isolation is important.
Also the reason why
the isolation is important, because you need that time. You need to be able to sort of unwind outside of work. I did feel for a long time that every hour that I wasn't thinking about something at delivery was, in some senses, cheating delivery and all of the people who work with me by not spending that time. And then I realized all that it was doing was effectively making me less effective at what I did. I wouldn't put in the amount of thought that I needed to getting to conclusions. I was just reacting to things rather than thinking them through. And once you get over that, once you realize that you're more effective, you're a machine in some shape or form, right? And you have to fine tune the machine, you have to maintain it. I realized that maintenance, in my case, involved being away from work, doing all of these things. And that made me very effective, in the 8 hours that I do spend. It doesn't mean there aren't days when we're doing more or less, but you get there, and it's just, if we're talking about this in a different context, you get the imposter syndrome, man. I get it all the time. Am I still good enough? Am I still thinking hard enough? Am I still working hard enough? And you see somebody else who's working harder than you at the company and you feel bad. You're kind of like, man, shit, I should be working harder than everyone else. And then you realize instead of you working harder, you need to talk to the guy and say, why are you working that hard? Like, what's going on? Why do you need so many hours in a day? So it's a pursuit of effectiveness, I guess, and then you get used to it. But it's hard to reconcile. I still struggle with it, honestly.
I mean, in the last maybe like 2 minutes, you use the word effectiveness 3 times. It's very important. It's very telling. If someone were to come to you and say, how should I think about effectiveness? And how should I think about my career? Not in terms of the number of hours that I put in, but in terms of effectiveness. It's about as broad a question as someone could ask you on effectiveness. What would you tell them?
Wherever you are, what is, again, I'll use an example. I can only speak from a delivery experience, but our logic would be to say, what is the one thing, you don't get to pick 2, you don't get to pick 3 or 5 or whatever it is. What is the one thing that you really, really, passionately is not a good word, it's thrown around too loosely, but that you really want to influence and change? Doesn't matter how big or small it is, it could be anything. Right? I want our riders to earn more money is a very broad and large ambition, but it could be something much smaller. I want us to lose no packages this month in the facility that I operate in. Great ambition to have. Pick that one thing and be super effective at it. Direct all your energy at that one thing. And don't, stress about other things. I think that's what we define as effectiveness. That's
So
what
go deep and go narrow.
As deep and as narrow as you can get. Doing that requires you to first be broad, because that requires that you eliminate everything else.
Right. What to go deep into.
But then depth there's no substitute for it. You have to be super deep to be effective. Yeah.
How old are you?
40.
Did it feel like you hit a milestone in any senses when you hit 40?
Man, of the many things I wanted to be at 30, 40 was not one of them. But it didn't feel as much like a milestone as it did like a millstone almost. You look at it and you're like, oh shit, I'm 40 now. You suddenly realize, you realize physically that you're 40. You suddenly realize when you have, I can now say, kids who are 24 or 25 in the company, and there is a very material generation gap between us and them. It's not even the same language. So you feel it suddenly. I'm glad I'm 40, but I don't know if it's a milestone.
They say, right? Like, I think 40s are, there's a lot of science that says, like, 40s are supposed to be one of the most happiest years of your life, because you've gone through those, like, early years of struggle and you build something and you're at a certain stage, etc. It's a fascinating article. Maybe I'll link that also. It's a Wall Street Journal article from about 2-3 years ago. I'll link that in the show notes. You talked about recovery. We were earlier talking about recovery, right? And it's incredibly hard. And you kind of feel that, right?
The physical slowdown is the most distressing part.
And it's that if you have one drink in an evening, you will feel it the next day.
Yes.
You will feel it. It feels, it's like one of those things that are like it makes you feel not fragile, it makes you feel mortal.
Yes.
Right? Like, up till your maybe mid-30s, like, late 30s, you sort of feel immortal. Like, I can throw anything at my body and like it'll handle it. And then you start to feel mortal, and then you kind of realize, at least for me, it happened at 45 where I started feeling.
For us, it happened at 40.
Yeah.
Scary.
This is a car or a vehicle that I have to make last 80 years or 90 years. I better take care of it.
Yeah.
All right. Last couple of questions. How happy are you on a scale of 1 to 10?
These days, 10.
All right. I think that's a Why do you just, my last question is like, why do you say these days?
It wasn't always the case. I think, it went through various cycles. I was happy before I started delivery, and the first couple of years, I think we were just happy out of sheer,
The energy, the shares,
just
correct, right?
the way a Labrador is happy, we were happy in that fashion. And then we went through, at least I went through a deep period of not being very happy when we were doing delivery. It was a combination of not knowing my own place. It was a combination of where the company was at. It was a combination of sort of almost, you're watching the company grow up and you weren't sure where it was going to go. And so I'd say at that point, I was possibly as low as, 2 or 3. It was you kind of felt like it was a grind at that time. And these days, the good thing is, I think, a good sense of where we want to get to and on our own terms. And outside of that, the balance that you're talking about, building it takes some time, getting to it takes some time. But once you have it, it's fun. There's a lot to look forward to.
What keeps you going now? What's that ambition or zeal or energy that gets you up every day and makes you want to continue building?
So I have the privilege of going to work. I've gone to work every single day of my career with my closest friends. That is without doubt the great privilege of our lives, certainly mine. Suraj and I have worked together now since 2008. So we've known each other 40% of our lives. Many of the people who work at Delhivery have become friends over the years. And I think that is just an incredible privilege to have. That keeps you going. You kind of, it's enjoyable. The other thing is a lot of kids who joined us very early, seeing them grow, the guy who runs our brokerage business, a guy called Vikas, he forced us to hire him. He came from Bain and he said, you have to hire me. I want to work with you guys. And we had no idea why. Today, he runs, our brokerage business, one of our sharpest guys. It's just great to see that. It gives you so much energy to see guys like that. You never, it's nice that we have whatever revenues we do and we've gone public and all that. But sort of these things are more interesting. They're a little more lasting than anything else. Those things keep you going, yeah. And the problem, it's just so unsolved. Unfortunately, it's come from a academic bent of mine. The academic problem is lovely. I like it. It's fun. And we are a physical business. When we solve a problem, hubs get created, automation goes live, people move packages around, trucks move on roads. It's just phenomenal to see. Every time I go up and down the highway, I see one of our trucks. I still feel, it's good to see them. It's good to see them moving things.
I want to end by, ask you something which you just said, that one of your privileges is that working in a company where a bunch of your friends are. Earlier, I asked you about who do you spend the most amount of time with, bunch of your friends and co-founders and stuff like that. Now, I fully identify with this, right? But there is also of late, and I think it's kind of somewhat correcting, but there was this phase where, especially a lot of the younger generation, thought that there's something wrong if you have friendships at work or deep friendships, because there's this kind of barrier that's supposed to exist between work and life, or between what you do because you're paid for it and what you do outside of it, right? It's not always that clean, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, if young people were to ask you, how should I think about life and professional life and friendships, what would you tell them? Look at me telling you young people. You're all of 40, so
no. Like we said, man. Now I feel moderately.
I must tell you this. This is someone else told me recently, saying that entrepreneurs have this again during a podcast, that there is entrepreneurs biological age, and then there is entrepreneurs actual advanced stage, because they experience time
differently
at a different rate and speed. So there is that bit. I give it to you. I'm sure you've experienced enough for a 60-year-old's experiences, even though you're physically in the body of a 40-year-old. But that said, what would be your advice to work, friendships, life mixing?
This is going to sound controversial, perhaps. I think your friendships come first. work is a accidental sort of, if you happen to have the ability to do good work while you happen to be friends with the people you work with, that is the icing on the cake. But if I had to rebuild my career all over again, whether delivery would happen or not, I think would not be one of the things I'd be worried about. I'd be more worried about working with the people I really want to work with. And I don't have any particular preference for what that would have entailed. Could have been anything at all. I think it's the other way around, because at the end of it, when I'm 70, sure, I'm going to be proud about the fact that we built this company, certainly. But even today, I worry more about, the friends I've collected along the way than necessarily whether or not delivery does anything, significantly different. I like the problem, but friends over work.
All right. Thank you so much, Sahil.
Thank you.
It's been lovely chatting.
Likewise. Thank you for having me.